Hello, folks. Figured it's about time I get to doing a project introduction on Sippy. For you, this will be the first video on that car, but for me, it's about the fourth or fifth one, so you have to forgive me if I speak a little out of tense and things like that. But anyway, the main objective here is to introduce the car and explain to you why I would buy something like a 25-year-old Escort station wagon and what sane person would do that? And the answer is probably no real sane person. But anyway, you guys will be seeing the car soon. But anyhow, here are just some pictures I have of the car and of the other Escorts that we've had. So obviously, when this all started, I didn't have any kind of intention of making a YouTube video or starting a channel or anything like that. So you'll have to just take stills. But anyhow, the first several pictures here are basically just the pictures that the car was advertised with when I bought it. Um, my car I bought out of Columbus, Ohio, with 74,000 miles on it about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And the reason I did that was at that time I was working various contract jobs, and I was driving out of town every week about 150 miles to go to work. So I'd drive out of town, either go to a hotel or eventually I did get an apartment, work all week, and then drive back home. So throughout the course of the week, I was driving about 500 miles a week. And the only other thing I had going right at that time was my TJ. And the Jeep gets like 15 miles per gallon. The wagon gets like 40. These Escorts do really well. So anyhow, I was working that job with the Jeep, and I started looking around for wagons, and I had a very specific list of requirements that I wanted, certain options that are kind of hard to find. I wanted air conditioning and a manual transmission, cruise control, cruise control tilt wheel, a tack dash, if you can believe that. If you're a younger car guy, you may not understand that it used to be a thing to get a tachometer in the dash. That wasn't standard, even on stick shift cars. So that was a thing I wanted. So anyway, this car popped up. I bought it from a guy that's just a complete scumbag. He had been asking like $4,500 or $5,000 for this car on Craigslist for weeks, and every week I would look at Craigslist and the price would come down like $500. So it went from, I think, $4,500 to $3,000 or $2,500 or something like that. And I emailed the dude and said, "Hey, I want to come see this car," but then I made a few fatal errors. I'm like, "But I have to drive a really long way to come see it," which was true because it was in Columbus, and what I was planning to do was leave work at Friday evening and drive back, and then Columbus was further to the east of what I was doing, so we were talking like a 450 mile trip to go get this car and then come back, plus I had to have a ride to go get it, so if I bought it. And anyway, and the guy's telling me everything I want to hear, really. He's like, "Oh yeah, it's completely rust free, this, that, and the other thing." That's completely not true. He he's bondoed up the rear quarter panels, one of which a lot worse than the other one. Front bumper is all cracked up. He bondoed that up as much as he could, and of course now it's all come undone. I get there and I start looking the car over. I'm like, well, this car is not what he claimed it was. And again, he was asking $2,500 for it at that point, and I'm just thinking to myself, I'm not paying more than $2,000 for this car, and $1,500 would be more than I'd want, more like what I want. And one of the first things he says to me is, "I'm not going to take less than $2,000 for this thing." It's like, well, perfect, dude. Did you forget that you were asking 500 more than that? But anyway, so I'm like, okay, fine. 500 less would have been a really good deal in my opinion for it, since it was exactly what I wanted. So I didn't really freak out about that. But when I say the guy was a total scumbag, here's what I mean. He starts telling me stories about when he was in the military and he was places that he couldn't say where he was, and it's like, dude, no, you were not special forces. You were not doing any of this stuff. You're completely full of crap. The guy was of the age where he would have been, a young teenager, maybe during Desert Storm. It's like, yeah, whatever, dude. I mean, It just completely full of crap. Had lied to me about the car and everything else. Um, so that, that was the dude I bought it from. So some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about with this car, or maybe you've already seen me work on with this car, I guess, depending on how this all goes. It's because that dude straight up lied to me. Which, if you've ever bought a used car, you know that feeling. That's. But when you buy a used 25-year-old economy car off of somebody, and then they lie to you about it, it's like, dude, why? Was the $300 you were trying to get really that much more important to you? So anyway, this is my car. That's the story why I wanted one of these. A very abbreviated version of how I bought it and everything else. But I'll get into a little backstory of why I even had it on my mind to seek out one of these. The primary reason for that is because my current girlfriend, we've been together for a little over 11 years at this point, and that's kind of a long story in and of itself. Many years ago, we'd only been dating for, I don't know, a year or two, and she had this just complete piece of junk, 96 Chevy Cavalier, and I just absolutely hate those cars with a passion anyway. They're difficult to work on. They don't really drive all that awesome. The just that car in particular had also made me mad. Um, Different story, but anyway. And oh, by the way, no offense if you're like the world's biggest J-body fan and you just absolutely love those Cavaliers. Hey, I'm glad that's for you. It's not for me. But anyway, she was driving it one day, and she had just decided to go back to college. She had started college earlier in her younger life, and then got away from that and went and worked, just some kind of menial jobs for several years, and decided she wanted to go back. So anyway, she had gone back to finish her undergrad, and she was driving her Cavalier to work or doing some errands or something one day, and she called me up and it's like, yeah, the car won't run anymore. There's something wrong with it. I'm like, okay. And I'm talking to her, and she's like, yeah, and it got really hot. I'm like, okay, well, what do you mean really hot? And she's like, oh, the temperature gauge was all the way maxed out. Now it's leaking stuff. I'm like, uh-oh. So I go down there and look at it, and sure enough, what likely happened is the thermostat had stuck shut on the thing. From what she described, she'd been driving it for about 10 minutes. So and the thermostat never came open. It got hot and cracked the head. You start cranking it over, and you could see the combustion gases in the surge tank of the thing. So it was just done. The car was super rusty. It had like 160 some thousand miles on it. It was just beat, and it was time to go. So she ended up borrowing a car from somebody for a few weeks, and at the time, the place I worked at, right around the corner, I'd actually seen it about a month prior to when her Cavalier died, was this little, red Escort. I didn't know anything about him at the time or anything. And I asked her, I'm like, hey, this car looks like it's in a lot better shape than yours. And I think they were asking like $1,000 for it, or $800, something like that. But it's a manual transmission. Do you want to go look at it? And she's like, no, I don't have any money, or whatever the story was. I think the primary thing was it was a stick, and she didn't have any money. Well, anyway, Cavalier explodes. She's on a borrowed vehicle. It's like, well, hey, let's go look at that Escort. So we did. And I only have one picture of that car, and it's actually after the car had met its demise. But it's the only picture I have. I wasn't on my mind to make YouTube videos and tell people this story on the internet when it happened. But anyway, so we went and looked at the car, and the first thing I do is start like digging handfuls of rust out of the quarter panels of the thing. These cars have like really thick, weird, rubbery paint. So they can be completely rusted out under the paint. It's kind of strange. I've never really seen another car like that. But anyway, so I'm looking at the thing, and the owners are there, and they're an older couple. They're probably in their late 50s, and it's the woman of the couple that owns the car. And she sees me start poking all these holes in her car, and her face just kind of goes white, and she's sort of freaking out. But at the same time, it's like I kind of told her, I'm like, look, the rust is already here, whether or not you knew it was. This is the way the car is. So anyway, I dig handfuls of rust out of the thing. I get under it, and I look at it, and one of the CV boots is cracked, and there's grease slung everywhere. Take the car on a test drive. It drives pretty good, really. She produces a manila folder that's like an inch thick with all the service records of this car for like the last. I think she had everything but like the first year or two since it was bought new. She was the second owner, and the first owner I think was a school teacher and drove the thing like hundreds of miles to school and work and stuff like that. And then she bought the thing and did the same thing. I think we bought it with like 140,000 miles on it. But she produced receipts for like brand new struts and springs, brand new battery, brand new alternator. Like had recently had brake work done to it. Like all this stuff, like that was fairly recent. That was probably $2 or $3 grand worth of stuff. And I'm thinking, well, even if it's rusty, this will be okay. And I just flat out asked her, I'm like, well, what do you take for the car? And I forget what she was asking for. She's like, well, I'm asking 1,000 or whatever. And her boyfriend's like, well, you told me you'd take 600 for it. I'm like, dude, right on. Thanks for helping out. And she's like, yeah, I'd let it go for 600. And I said to my girlfriend, I'm like, well, it's your car, you want it? And she's like, yeah. So paid for it and brought it home. So, pardon me. It's punted the mic a couple times there. So it came home, and as soon as it got home, like I said, started doing maintenance kind of stuff to it. Dropped a half shaft and all kinds of things in it. And over the years, I did quite a bit of work on that car. But the very short version of that long story with the history of that car is that she drove that for 2 years of her undergrad, all 3 years of law school, and about a year after law school graduation. So we bought that car with like 130 or 40,000 miles on it, and she drove it to 235 before essentially I condemned it to death due to rust. What had actually happened is she had to move away to go to law school. So when she moved away, she made inroads in that legal community in a different town. So that's where she got her first job when she graduated. So she was still on the weekends, like commuting an hour and a half or whatever to come visit me. And she had come for a weekend visit, and Sunday afternoon she went to leave. She started the car up and put her foot on the clutch, and the throw-out bearing started screaming. And I just told her, I'm like, well, that car's dead, because it's too rusty for me to even attempt to pull the transmission out of. If I touch that transmission cross member, it's not going to go back in. So car's totaled. Sorry about that, but it's done. And that's how that happened, I guess. So anyhow, her car was deemed deceased or as parts. But like I said, I actually put a lot of work into that car and a lot of new parts on that car, and got to know them pretty well. And they're pretty simple cars to work on, despite what you may see as I work on them and curse and hate my life. But anyway, so this time there was another vehicle to borrow. I was down to just one driver, and at the time I had health issues and wasn't working either. So I was kind of laid up and slowed down, and had actually just got done regearing my Jeep. That's one of the things that gave me health issues. I ended up slipping 2 discs in my back, axle swapping the thing. But anyhow, so the first thought I had was, well, let's get on Craigslist and see if there's another Escort, because you've got good tires and a new battery and all this other stuff. And sure enough, there was. So there was one about an hour and a half away with like 72,000 miles on it. And in pictures, the thing looked really nice. And the pictures were of a car in a garage. It's like, who parks a 95 Escort in a garage in 2015? Like freaking nobody, right? So I emailed the lady, and she's like, yeah, I've had a lot of interest in it, come on over, and we'll get it done. Despite my girlfriend having gone to law school, turns out graduating lawyers don't make very much money at all in this economy. Law schools have been graduating way too many attorneys for a long time now, and have almost just kind of become degree mills. I mean, she learned stuff in law school, she's a good attorney, but there's just way too many lawyers. She didn't have any money. So she ends up calling her boss, crying, and is like, I need to borrow, $1,100 to go buy this other Escort. And that's what happened, and she did. So I don't think I mentioned it, but the first car, I dubbed the Thunderscort, which is a name she absolutely hates. I'll also throw it out there that she absolutely hates Escorts. She hates manual transmissions, everything else. But, this is what we had. So we go out and look at this thing, and it turns out that it is what would have been in the 80s called an Escort Pony, which was the completely stripped down model. So manual steering, no air conditioning, manual windows, manual everything. Only thing that's power on it is brakes. Another stick shift car and everything else. And so this car became Thunderscourt 2 or T2, and she's still driving it now. But anyway, so we go look at this thing. It's actually a pretty nice car. It hasn't got hardly a spot of rust on it. Her boyfriend, or the woman we bought it from, the reason the car was for sale is because her then ex-boyfriend of, I think, like days maybe, she found out he was like cheating on her or something, and he was some kind of bum anyway, and she bought him the car anyhow. So she like immediately repossesses the car from this dude, like took his keys away, and booted him out of her life. So she was like getting rid of his car immediately. you know, Colorful story to say the least. So we go over there and look at the thing, and the car is really nice on one side. The other side of it looks like it's been run into a fence row. The whole side of the car is all wrinkled up and dented to beyond belief. But so what? She's looking for transportation, not a show car to take places and impress people with the '95 Escort Pony. But anyway, it's a legitimately pretty nice car. So she buys it, and we'll bring it home, and I tell her, because with T1 the whole idea was, hey, you need to save up some money, and this is just a car that you're going to drive for 6 months or a year or whatever to get you over the hump, and then let's get something else. So that car, I was constantly just nickel and diming it back together, doing just what needed done, instead of like replace the exhaust, I just patch something and stuff like that. And when the second one came home, I told her, like, look, I'm not doing that. It's not going to be 5 degrees when this thing that I know is already weak breaks, or 105 degrees. There are things that we know this car is going to need, and we're just doing them, and that's that. So when that car came home, I put new quick struts on the front. It still should do the rear. All these cars, all three of them I've had, always need new rear brake lines. She drove it for a couple months before that. Actually, she had a brake line fail like 3 miles from my house. So that kind of became an emergency. But I did recently did front brakes on it. We took the tires off of her first one that were nice Michelins, put them on the second one. We've since had to put new tires on the one she's driving on T2 again. But anyway, so I just totally went through the car, rebuilt all the steering, put a fuel pump in it because the fuel pump that was in it when we bought it was just kind of loud. And that other than the first car being just a complete tank. I mean, we bought it for nothing, and she abused it for years and put just pennies into it when I had to, and the thing just kept going and going and going. I mean, the first one, the air conditioning, and it still worked the day I took it to the junkyard, which is just amazing. Um, so anyway, when we bought the second one, it's kind of when I developed a real appreciation of these cars, because that's really when I got deep into one, or deeper into one. Did timing belt and just maintenance the whole thing up, to the point that she bought it at 72,000. I think it's got like 150 something thousand on it now, and it's been 3.5 4 years, and it's essentially been trouble free for her. She bought it for 1,100. I think we've probably put another 2 grand in it past that over these years. New exhaust, stuff like that. And it's been a good car. And hers, since it's all manual, everything gets like 40, and it's a coupe. It's not a wagon. So it's like 40 miles per gallon, and she's still living far away from home, or my home. And so anyway, that's what led me down the road of, hey, I want to get an Escort, but if I get one, I want a wagon, because I want to actually be able to like put stuff in it. And turns out when you park the two of them next to each other, the wagon really doesn't give you a whole lot more. The two doors have such big front doors that if you want to just stuff a two-door full of stuff, you can. The Escort I definitely would not buy as a sedan, because then you lose the best of both worlds of the wagon and the coupe. They're not hatchbacks. So anyway, that is the really long, rambly story of why I ended up with an Escort wagon. Now that I've got through some of the history on it, I'll finish up a little bit with some of the work I've done to my car, before you guys knew anything about it. Speaking of the guy that sold it to me just being an utter scumbag, one of the first things that happen is driving the thing around, or I'd get away from the immediate area of where we bought it from. The guy lived like right by Ohio State University, and it was like a football game Sunday when I picked it up, so traffic's just packed. I had my mother give me a ride to pick it up, so she's following me, and I told her before we left, it's like, hey, let's just get out of the vicinity of OSU, and I'm gonna find a gas station and fill this thing up with gas. So when you buy a used car, you never know if the gas gauge even works. So that's what we do. Pull into a gas station. I start filling up with gas. My mom comes over to me and she's like, hey, only one brake light is working, and I don't think the turn signals work, and this, that, and the other thing. Like, okay, awesome. Um, so I'm like, all right, well, I'll worry about that when I get home. This is like a late November 2016, and it was like the first snow of the year, and I'm in this car that I've owned for 12 minutes, no license plate. My mother, who is in her late 60s at that point, is following me. I don't want her out in this stuff either. And so I'm driving along, and I'm just trying to get home, and I start smelling gas. Now, like, what in the world? Why? What's up with the fuel smell? This thing was fine when I test drove it and everything else. And I, my mom calls me on the cell phone, and she's like, yeah, I want to stop and get something to eat. I'm like, okay, cool. So we, pull into a Wendy's or something like that, and she goes in to get herself something to eat, and I start looking over the car, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I don't see anything dripping or anything like that. And this is probably like still 2.5 hours from home at this point. So I'm driving the car back, and I can virtually see the gas gauge dropping on the dash. And like I said, this is the first wagon I have any experience with, but I've got a fair bit of experience with this platform. Like, this car should not be getting like 15 miles per gallon. What's going on? And it turns out that what had happened is the rubber flex hose between the fuel filler neck and the gas tank was just all split out and leaking. And there's absolutely no way the guy I bought it from didn't know that was true. Because if you put a full tank of gas in it, it would just start dumping gas in the ground. So by the time I got it home, it was obvious what was going on. You could actually see the gas pouring out of it at that point. Just by virtue of that guy knowing that was wrong with the car, I'm going to guess he just quit driving it. And then when it sat for months and months as he was trying to get a king's ransom out of it on Craigslist, must have got enough dirt or something in there to sort of halfway seal the leak, so I couldn't smell it or anything. So anyhow, basically, as soon as I get the car home, or I take it back, the car gets home, and then the contract job I was working suddenly ended. So I no longer had any need of the economy car, and I was unemployed and just looking around for work. So the car more or less just sat for uh, probably probably about the next 8 or 9 months. I ended up with another contract job that was local, and then I took a full-time job which that contract ended unexpectedly too. And that's what I figured out about contract work is don't ever do it. It might pay a lot, but it's going to last minutes. Or at least for me it did. Some guys work like $60 an hour contract jobs for 30 years, but that's not how it went for me. So anyway, so the car just sat around for a while, and then I ended up taking the job that I have now, which is a permanent regular job, and I've been doing this for about a year and a half, but had to move to do it. So I moved about an hour and a half away, sold my house, all that stuff. So when that happened, it's like, hey, it'd be really great to have the wagon to come back on the weekends and pack my house up and prepare to move. And the wagon actually just became my moving van, is what happened. If you've seen, I'm a car guy, and I'm kind of a pack rat too, which I think kind of goes with the territory if you are a car guy. So just had lots of junk to move, a lot of junk just to get rid of too. So the car actually went into my dad's shop for about the first month I was working away from home. Because, like I said, all these things always need brake lines put on them, so I did that right quick. Fixed the taillights, and what I discovered there is both taillight housings were actually broken, and somebody had gone in there and just put grease all over the bulb connections, and then presumably went to the junkyard, got different ones, and like wire nutted them into the vehicle harness. And that was all screwed up, so I had to take all the rear taillight harness out of it and the rear hatch harness out of it, I actually took the rear hatch harness out of it and took it back to the hotel with me one week and went through it and soldered all the broken connections back together and all that stuff, at a desk in a hotel room, and got the car back together then. Well, and about the time I got that all done was when I was able to sign a lease to rent a house in the town I was moving to. So then it was time to just start moving. So during the week for work, I would drive the Jeep because it was the more known entity and more reliable, and the Escort still needed stuff done. And then on the weekends to go back to my house and pack stuff up, I would take the wagon and just pack it to the gills and just bring it back every week and unload it, and that went on for a while. And then I finally got tired of looking at the thing, more or less sitting in my driveway for 6 or 7 months. I knew the Jeep would need to come down for maintenance, the Escort had sprung a radiator hose leak. So it's like, well, I'll pull the Escort into the garage over Christmas because, like a lot of people, I get basically 2 weeks off work at Christmas. And I'll just put it up on stands and we'll just get after it. Well, put it in the garage at Christmas time, and at Christmas I got sick and I had some family stuff going on, so only actually was able to work on it for, a day or two. And then when I finally got back to it, the Jeep exploded. And when I say exploded, I mean, minor explosion. Exhaust manifold blew up on my Jeep the first night the Escort was in the garage. So I had to get done the work that needed done onto the Escort, my Sippy Cup, to be able to have something to drive to work. So that is where it stands now. The series of videos you guys are going to see now kind of catches you up through all of that. You'll see the timing belt and stuff like that happen. And so the car is still due to come back in the garage and get the rest of the maintenance stuff done that I have done on T2. Full steering rebuild, quick struts all around, just service stuff, change transmission fluid, stuff that never ever gets done on a car that's 25 years old with 72,000 miles on it. This car had 74,000 miles on it when I bought it. So it's never been touched. Nothing's ever been changed. Nothing is ever open. So stuff like that. But at this point, I've been daily driving it for, I guess, about 2 months. And I have just bought another vehicle that I actually need to work on. And that's actually going to be the next video I'm about to sit right here and make. So there's the history on the car. Oh, I guess that's one last thing I didn't tell you. The reason it's called Sippy Cup is because the car holds just a ton of cargo and it just sips fuel. So, and it's a goofy, childish name that I think is hilarious. So that's why it's the Sippy Cup. So anyway, that's where the car stands now. You're going to see a lot more of it around. It needs a lot more work. But until now, thanks for sitting through the, half-hour long now rambletron of why in the world anyone would ever buy one of these cars, and the story of how I got into them, and the story of the other two cars, and everything else. And let me know if you like this kind of a format video. I mean, they won't usually be like a few slideshow picture kind of video type things. They'll actually be videos. But if you hate the kind of vlog or whatever I'm doing right now, won't do it anymore. But just felt that I wanted to get the story of the car out there. So take care, guys. Thanks for watching.